let's say you want to take a new habit of remembering to take fish oil every morning. So then when you brush your teeth, you start taking the fish oil right before you start brushing your teeth. And so brushing your teeth is a reminder or a cue to take the fish oil. And so like
Mm.
you link them together and then it's becomes part of the routine.
Welcome back to the Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I, Jose, your host, get to talk about outside the box ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about habits, how to form habits, what happens when we do form habits, um, just different things about revolving around the idea of building a consistent way of living. So, before we actually get started, I want to invite you guys to subscribe to our channel. We are a channel that is diversifying as we speak. We talk about all sorts of stuff, how to build a business, artists, movie criticism. We also bring in different specialists from different areas of study, from psychology to theology, you name it. We try to provide some amazing content for you guys because honestly, what we're trying to do here with this podcast is bring truth and goodness to people. So we're trying to understand the world from different viewpoints to see if we can actually find ways to solve problems in a better way. So if that sounds something like that you would be interested in, subscribe to our channel and also make sure to leave a comment during this podcast. So, still, I know before the podcast we were talking about habits, how to form habits, and I was just left with a really interesting viewpoint from a podcast that I recently listened to. And the main takeaway that I got from this podcast that I listened to was that the it all starts by showing up. Everything starts by showing up. Whether you want to be a better musician, whether you want to work out more, whether you want to sleep on time, whatever habit you want to build, it all starts by showing up. And I thought that was so interesting because the example that they gave during the podcast, and this is actually based on a podcast that I saw with Lewis Howes. He had it got the writer from Atomic Habits, which is a book that has become very popular. And what the guest was saying was that one of his readers from the book was actually took this idea to another level and started going to the gym for 5 minutes. And it sounds kind of absurd, right? He would go for 5 minutes for a whole month, right? And you would say, like, well, why show up in the first place? Well, what he was trying to do is master the art of showing up, because I feel like one of the things that really is hard to do it to when you're starting to build habits is just the aspect of starting, of showing up, of getting there,
Yeah,
of you know
yeah,
sitting
exactly.
down, forcing yourself to sit down and write. um and honestly, I've done this recently, like in the past 3 days, where after I listened to that podcast, and it's been so freeing because sometimes you think like, oh, I have to be there an hour to work out, or I have to be, sitting down and write on my journal for 30 minutes. And it's like, oh, it's a matter of showing up and doing a little bit each day. And
Mm.
so whether it be, showing up and working out for 15 minutes and then having to leave, or showing up and, writing writing a sentence for your journal that day, what a sentence about what your thoughts were. um it's just getting started, right? And I think that's always the hard part, of building habits. So what do you think, Steele? Have you ever encountered this, or what are your initial thoughts about what about showing up?
Yeah, when you explain that idea of the 5 minute kind of rule that you were talking about before the podcast of like, exercising for 5 minutes and then like going to adoration for 5 minutes or
Yeah.
writing for 5 minutes. I think that's really interesting because it makes sense from a psychological point of view. And it actually, for some, I'll get to this later, but for some reason, it reminds me of something called behavioral activation, a treatment for depression. Actually, I'll touch on that after this, but like I think it's fascinating from a psychological point of view because you think about it like this, like you say, kind of like when you think about, oh, I gotta go exercise for an hour, you're kind of discouraged almost, or like you almost like, I don't know if I feel like doing a whole hour of exercise or doing this whole hour of this or that or whatever new habit you're trying to do. It sounds intimidating and it sounds like it's gonna be too much. But if you knock that down to 5 minutes, it makes more sense because then you're like, well, I could probably do 5 minutes. That's not really that long. And then you start doing it. And then, like you said, you just show up for those 5 minutes and then you do it that each day and each week. And then before you know, like it's almost like it turns into a habit and then becomes part of your normal routine, just like anything else becomes part of the routine. So I could see how that method makes sense. And then it grows like a seed and then it just keeps growing and bigger. And maybe then you're spending 30 minutes instead exercising instead of 5. But the variable activation part, that the reason why it reminds me of that is because you said that you kinda have to force yourself to do it, and the whole thing about depression is it turns into a cycle of not doing anything, and then that makes you feel more depressed because 'cause you're not doing the things you usually enjoy, and you're not getting out as much, you're maybe not exercising as much, all these things that could lift you out of depression. So the idea is you wanna make a list of things, enjoyable activities and exercise and other positive things you can do, so that you're more likely to look at that list, and then when you're more likely to choose something, because if you don't have that list, you're kind of just sitting there depressed. You're not Things aren't going to come to your mind. It's just you're not in that right mental state. But if you have that list, you can go to it and force yourself to do something on the list, and then you make that part of your kind of schedule, and then it slowly lifts you out of depression.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's so interesting because, Jordan Peterson talks about this, that really what gets people out of those states of like depression or sadness is the feeling of growing, the feeling of aiming at something and getting better each day and noticing that the day before you weren't able to do play this melody the same way that you can today. And so, you feel like you've grown, you feel like there's been an aspect that has taken you further into your ultimate goal. And I think that's really what might be causing depression nowadays. That people don't have an aim, people don't know how to show up in the first place, right? Because we've bombarded people with the idea of, no, you have to be happy all the time, you have to be good all the time. It's like, no, like actually, it does take some forcing and does take some
yeah,
discomfort, does
it
take
takes work
some, you know, I guess struggles, right?
and work too. It takes work, like the world doesn't give everything to us for free and we have to earn things. We have to practice. We have to go through trials and errors. We have to fail to get better. And people have
Yeah.
it's like we've forgotten that and we're trying to shelter maybe.
Yeah, we're living in a society where we have 10th place trophies. I mean,
And that's what I
what
mean.
is going on?
That's what I'm saying. It's like no wonder people don't have meaning or purpose or motivation because it's like everything's handed to you all the time and there's no challenge or we're not encouraging people to get out and take risks, I guess. I don't know what it is. This could be all sorts of different things. But to your point earlier, incremental changes, incremental progress, even if it's just the tiniest amount of progress, it's still progress. It still
Yeah,
counts. Even if it's 5 minutes and like you said, you notice a tiny little bit of difference of how you're playing the instrument, it's
yeah,
still progress. It's still moving you forward. So it's powerful,
yeah. And what's so interesting is I've been listening to how people, successful people think. And one of the things is that what successful people think is they say, this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna start today. Whatever it takes, I'm gonna start today. So, but when people think like, oh, I'm gonna start today, they think like, oh, you need to do like 2 hours of whatever you want to achieve. And it's like, no, it could be 5 minutes, incremental changes. But the fact that you cross that barrier of saying like, oh, I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough money, um, I don't have the resources. It's like, no, you can do it. You just have to think outside of the box, maybe a little bit
and show up.
to
You know?
show up. Yeah. And show
Showing
up. Yeah,
Showing
show
up
up
is so
to
important.
and be committed to that plan because
Yeah.
I gotta be honest, sometimes discipline wise or persistent wise, sometimes I do slack a little bit. Um, and so for example, I'll start working out and I'm really committed. But I think what I've done in the past, which is different from what I've done recently, is in the past I've overcommitted myself to doing an hour each day of working out when even though that's the ideal, right? That's the place where I want to essentially end up, right? Perhaps, at the moment I could probably, be satisfied with doing a minimum of 10, 15 minutes, right? Of working out, doing some sort of exercise, but at the gym, right? Like going to the gym, not in my backyard, like going to that specific spot because I know that there's such a thing as environment memory. And so
Oh,
your body tends to function better when it's in the environment that it's you're trying to achieve something. If you're in the environment, it's easier because you see people working out, you see all the machinery that is there. So you just feel more prone to work out when you're in an environment that is dedicated to working out
yeah, that makes
instead
sense.
of in your house, right? Where you might probably not have equipment. Perhaps you have a certain room, right?
Yeah.
Have a certain room that's dedicated specifically just to working out and exercise. Then in that case, that room kind of encompasses memory in,
You
in
know what
that
else?
room.
And you know what? What can happen at your house? You could get distracted. You could because when you show up at the gym, you're there. Like you've maybe even driven or walked or bicycled all the way
Yeah.
there. You took all that time to go there. You're not just gonna like not do it once you show up. Whereas when you're at your house, you could be like, oh well, I was going to, but you know what? I don't really feel like it. You
Or
know?
sometimes, I find myself doing this. I start working out at home and then I notice like, oh, I'm working out in the floor and I notice that it's a little bit dirty. So I start sweeping it a
Uh,
little bit. And so I start doing other
the
activities,
sidetracks.
like besides working out. And so even though I do come back to finishing the workout, I I do get a little bit distracted. And I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot more distractions and stuff. That's like when I was in college, when I had to study and stuff, like it would actually be I would actually make more progress and have more focus when I went to the library or even when I was in Treadway, because Treadway has those small rooms, like, I could make it dark and just have that desk light on. It's so much
Mm,
easier to concentrate and focus. But I think you mentioned before the podcast something about focus. Like focus is important for this type of habit changing, I think, right? Like
yeah. It's so interesting because like listening to a lot of business, I guess, people that are sharing knowledge out there. A lot of people say time is money, time is money, time is money, right? So we have such an emphasis on time, but listening to this guy, his name is Alex Hermosi, he he had a video about how time is actually not the most essential resource, but rather focus is the most important resource because you can have a lot of time. But if you are distracted and not focused, then you don't get much done during that time. But if you do have focus, um, you could get a lot of done and even more within a certain hour that maybe some people spend their whole day trying to get done, right? And so I just think that is so interesting how focus is
mm,
even more important. I mean, it was totally a mind switch thinking about it that way that I'm trying to not conserve or manage my time, but trying to manage and conserve my focus, like putting myself in states where I'm focused. And I've started doing this while eating because nowadays we're so used to being up and down, doing a lot of things at the same time, multitasking.
yeah.
And I've started doing this when I sit down to eat. I won't watch TV and I won't look at my phone.
Wow, that's
It's
impressive.
hard, man. It's
That's
hard.
smart.
It's
I don't
tempting,
know if I could do that.
but I make the commitment to focus on eating
Yeah,
at that moment. And I have a little sticky note on the side that if I think of, hey, I have homework due, or I have to email this person, then I can just write it down on my sticky note.
it's good. Yeah.
And building focus is something we don't really talk about um today. I mean, it's actually pretty surprising because I tend to listen to a lot of information online, and which is maybe a disfocus, right? Perhaps, but I just don't hear a lot of people talking about this
Yeah,
idea of
that's
focus.
yeah, I don't
Uh,
know. I mean, I
I
don't know
mean, maybe more in the mindfulness side of things, like,
right.
where mindfulness has started taking place. I hear a little bit of that, like you have to meditate and focus, right? But then outside of that, it almost becomes, you know, unheard of. It. I mean, a lot of people don't relate meditation or all these activities to the idea of focus, but that's essentially what they're building, and I think that's why they're so effective, because they're actually training people to be focused, and that's why they have all these great results, because what they're really doing is just training their focus. But we're not identifying focus as the main point. They're talking about it in the sense of mindfulness and meditation. This is what's actually like important, but we're not talking about focus as a resource, right? We're
Yeah.
not talking about it as a resource. We're talking about it more as an outcome, or as a byproduct of meditation or mindfulness or prayer.
Mm,
So yeah, I
cool.
think that there's like something there that could be tapped into.
Yeah, focus could be used as a powerful tool for a lot of different things, you know? If you want to use it for changing habits, then it's about not getting distracted when you're trying to try a new habit or change a habit, you know, because distraction is the enemy that can take you away from your goals.
Yeah.
You know, to focus, you got to get in your zone. Everyone has some type of way that they can get focused that's probably unique to them, you know? Like for
Yeah.
me, like, to study at St. Mary's, it was, like, especially in Trinity Hall, in my dorm, small dorm, you have a desk and you have a light, and I would turn off the main light and just have the desk light on only and my computer light, and I would have my headphones in, I'll be listening to some type of study music, and my paper be in front of me, and I would just be in the zone because the music would
Yeah.
drown out all the noise. There wouldn't be distractions around me because there was just that one light, so the light was only focused on this area, and I was just in pure focus mode, and that's what it takes for me to get in the zone, and for other people, it might be other ways, you know?
Yeah, and it's actually pretty cool, because it's almost like reprogramming, like
Yeah,
building the same environment so that you can perform as you did before. And so it's almost, it might take a little bit of tinkering at first to try to figure out what's the best way to learn. I mean, I know that for me, if I'm in a place where there's a lot of people, I like to socialize. And so I can't study in a place where there's a lot of people. I have to shut myself somewhere where I won't see anyone in order to get work done, or it has to be silent.
I learned that too.
I can't be listening to hip hop or Latin funky
Right.
music, right? Because that's gonna get me dancing. I'm not gonna be thinking
Yeah, you
about.
start dancing while you're studying.
I know, right? I mean, maybe some people I've seen, they're phenomenal at that, but it's finding what works best for everyone. Like you said, everybody has their own ritual. Everybody has their own way of finding that focus, which is important, right? And I'm starting to almost create a formula in my head, which is like ideal environment with with uh with programming, right? Your ideal programming plus focus equals exponential outcomes,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Because you can make the most of your time with that, right? You have to have an environment like what we talked about, going to the gym, because you're more motivated to be to work out if you're in a gym, right? You see you see people, hammering the weights, and maybe if you were by yourself at home, you wouldn't push yourself that hard, but
Yeah,
there's that peer pressure, or perhaps maybe there's a girl you want to show off to, and you just push that weight, and so it motivates you or something. I don't know. But ideal environment, and then ideal programming, it's like what you said, maybe finding music that helps you focus, or uh sitting down in the same place, perhaps not having a, you know maybe smelling something that helps you kind of get in the zone, and
yeah,
then focus, right? Building focus. So a lot of
checklist.
people build it through meditation, mindfulness, prayer. So if you can have those three buckets in in a good state, I think there's an opportunity for exponential
Yeah,
productivity.
yeah, and maybe even checklists too, or even like timers. Because like I think I'm trying to remember. Like I remember doing this at some point in my life, but I can't remember when. And I did this technique. It was an interesting technique to where I set timers for myself for different activities throughout the day. Like I
Mm,
set a timer for how long I was going to spend writing, and then a timer for how long I was going to like play music or do some type of creative thing, and then a timer for how long I would study, and then a timer for this and that and this and that. And even timers for like 15-minute breaks in between studying. And I remember that, like, it made me feel so much more productive, because if you don't
mm,
have, like, a time limit or a checklist of things you wanna do in the day, you lose track of all of it, and then maybe you get
yeah,
as much stuff as you want to get done in the day. So, like, if you have a checklist, you can be like, "These are my goals to achieve by the end of today," and I have it broken down by these different time periods, so I know no matter what I do today, I am gonna accomplish all of these goals by the end of the day, according to the time limits of this checklist. That could be beneficial, I feel like.
yeah. I actually think that's so cool, because there might be someone listening out there and saying like, hey, that sounds all really nice, but I don't have time. I just don't have time, not even 5 minutes of time to start working out, or not even 5 minutes to drive over to a gym, or not even 5 minutes to whatever it might be, right? Journal, or they just don't have time, supposedly. But perhaps what could be going on is that they're not putting boundaries on certain activities. And so perhaps, they're spending 2 hours of watching YouTube, when they could just watch 20 minutes, and then now you have an hour and 40 minutes free for other stuff, right? Um
Time
so I
management.
think also, the beginning aspects before starting to build habits, if time is an issue, is probably doing an audit of your time. What are you spending your time on? I know we did this in college. I know one of my peer coaches had me do time audits of where I was spending time, where I could, improve. And I started noticing that YouTube was sucking in a lot of time, and
Amen.
it's kind of crazy because nowadays, right, we that's where we sometimes consume information, social media, online,
A
it's
big distraction.
especially for curious people,
The
it
rabbit
sucks
hole.
in a lot of stuff, but maybe putting boundaries between those and saying like, you know what, actually, I and that might be a habit. That might be a habit to start, right? To help.
Yeah, it needs to be good.
Maybe today I'm not gonna spend an hour or 2 hours on social media, and I'm gonna allocate 5 minutes of those 2 hours to work out.
And I hear some people who quit social media feel happier, they feel less stressed. Maybe because they don't have to keep up with as much stuff, or I think they also feel like they have more time. So I
Yeah.
wonder if and I'm not saying like I'm also like I'm like obviously we're gonna keep using social media because we need it to produce our podcast, to produce my movie, to like market my movies and stuff. But I want to ask the question, like I wonder if technology and the internet and all that didn't exist, would we be more productive or less productive? I don't know.
That's I think you could go both ways
Yeah,
because
the internet
certainly
makes things fast.
technology has allowed it for us to be able to message each other faster. I mean, if we didn't have phones, we wouldn't be able to communicate, or if we didn't have the screen, this computer to record this podcast. I mean, we would have to meet in person, and we live in two different cities, and so recording a podcast would mean that we would have to meet every other week or 2 months. Yeah, I don't know, what the time frame would be, but I think it does facilitate many things when used with prudence and temperance,
Yeah,
right? So I think if we use technology in a virtuous way, and what I mean by virtuous is, we form our virtues, and this could be another podcast, but we form our virtues in a way that align with goodness, beauty, and truth, right? Which means that if we're striving for beauty, goodness, and truth, we're being balanced with our decisions. We are not spending too much time on YouTube, even though it might be a part of our day, part of our way of learning something new, or part of our way of distracting ourselves for a little bit. Um, it might just be, that becoming virtuous just means that we become a little bit more uh tempered, humble, all those virtues help us make better decisions, which therefore free us, because a lot of people say like, oh no, that sounds too constraining, but it's actually, if we develop those, we become free to actually choose what we ideally want to do in life, right?
I
and
agree.
so
I agree.
and so with temperance, I think for sure that somebody could balance how much time they spend in different activities. And
Yeah, I think that's what it's about because
yeah,
what made me think about that is that I heard someone in some type of article was talking about how they would spend like 3 hours on social media, and then when they cut it out, they had like 3 extra hours in their day, and it's like that's what made me think. Like if we could limit our time or balance our time, then who knows how many more hours and time we could save in our day. And
and honestly, what we're saving is really not just time but focus,
yeah,
right? Going back to the resource of focus. Like when we watch social media, sometimes we're comparing ourselves to other people, and
right,
so that this focuses us from the idea of like, oh shoot, this person has this car and I don't have that car, and maybe I'm not enough, and we spend time reminiscing on our flaws sometimes, because social media presents people as, gods almost.
good,
They
100%.
seem flawless, they seem
Yeah,
perfect, they seem like they have it all, right? We don't know what's going on in their life and what could potentially be going on in their relationships and stuff. But on social media, everybody looks great, and we're trying to keep this reputation. And so when we see other people, we're like, oh man, maybe I'm not doing enough, or maybe I lost uh yeah, maybe I'm not going on the right path. So I think a lot of people can reminisce on that and get distracted. So potentially social media could be a form of distraction, even though I don't think it's bad in essence. I
yeah,
think if somebody's virtuous and uses social media, they can use it for the actual benefit of communicating with people, sharing content, and all the benefits that social media has brought. And so, like you were saying, I don't think it's essentially something I would cut out from my life,
yeah,
but I do think that I would need to grow in virtue in order to better use those platforms, so that I don't get hooked into like, oh, reading this feed, and sometimes I or like trying to connect with someone, or like, you
yeah,
know stalk them or something. I don't know. Like, you could do so many things on social media, but uh yeah, that's a little bit of that. But focus is certainly important when building habits, and social media, if not used correctly, could sway people. and
Yeah,
the byproduct, I think in that sense, the byproduct is losing a lot of time.
I think so too. And time is the most important resource of all time.
Yeah. Of all time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, just knowing how to best use your focus so that you can optimize your time.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so we're talking about optimizing time, and yeah, I'm trying to think of other things that, when building habits, what people could benefit
Well, with
from
building
it.
habits, one thing I remember from therapy treatments is you start building a habit by chaining it to another habit. I think if I remember correctly.
Mm,
So you kind of slowly link it to another habit to like carry it along until it becomes a stronger habit. So like if you're brushing your teeth every morning, right? I guess like a crazy example, like let's say you want to take a new habit of remembering to take fish oil every morning. So then when you brush your teeth, you start taking the fish oil right before you start brushing your teeth. And so brushing your teeth is a reminder or a cue to take the fish oil. And so like
mm,
you link them together and then it's becomes part of the routine.
yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that there's other ways to kind of motivate people. I mean, positive reinforcement, right?
Yeah, reward.
Perhaps, a
Reward is
reward system
definitely
for completing a certain task and saying like, hey, once I lose 20 pounds, I'll I'll get to
I'll eat 10 cakes.
yeah, eat 10 cakes or eat a slice of cheesecake that I love, or I don't know, something similar to that. Um Reward system, even associating good outcomes from it. I
Definitely.
think sometimes there's if you make the decision or the action pleasurable, right? Going into the pleasurable aspect, you're more prone to do it again if it was a pleasurable outcome or
Yeah,
action.
definitely. Yeah. So rewards can be very powerful.
Yeah. So associating it with a pleasurable outcome
Yeah,
could
positive.
potentially, you know, give a good way to build that and reinforce that action.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So any last thoughts, Steele?
The only thing I could think of is building habits is difficult, but I think what Jose was saying about starting small and gradually building it up, that is how you do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah,
it's
I think as we mentioned before, the the formula of having an ideal environment, priming yourself in the way that you just work best, right? So that comes with knowing thyself, um, having the aspect of focus, and perhaps adding the last one, maybe a reward for having achieved, right? Maybe that could be an after product of having achieved, right? Which is the equal to the equation. But yeah, I think it helps me kind of pack it up in an equation to kind of understand kind of like some of the big aspects of forming habits.
yeah, definitely.
So
You gotta know your vision and goal. Definitely.
yeah, the why, and also why you're doing it. Why do
Yeah,
you want to start this habit? Right? Because if you just started because you know somebody else is doing it, potentially they have a better why and reason why to do it. So
not gonna be
it
as
might not be as lasting for you, but
yeah, it's gotta be a good reason too. Definitely.
yeah. So knowing your purpose, knowing your why is certainly important to know where you're gonna go with this. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this podcast and listening to this podcast. We appreciate your time if you're here at the end of the podcast. And we really like to know what you thought about our content today. What did you think was interesting? Are you going to build a certain habit? Let us know down below. Um, we're really interested in knowing what our community is really receptive to and what y'all are enjoying. So let us know down below in the comment section, and subscribe to our channel if this is something that you appreciate it. Make it a habit to like our videos, and we will see you next time. Take care.